I would like to invite you into the tea industry, which is very, very diverse. For us, big, I think, in considered and compared to others in this room, pretty small, but a very, very interesting industry. Of course, the title is quite big, so of course today we won't secure human rights and climate in the whole world, but at least I want to talk about our ambitions and also practical approaches in our risk management, about how we see these things, about what the general risk level is in our supply chain, and about what we do to do our best to collaborate, to invite everyone in the value chain to have a joint look at these topics and complex topics, and do our best to solve it, or to hopefully secure the human rights and climate in our value chain. Who are we? Martin Bauer. We're a family business, also founded by the name of Martin Bauer, from Martin Bauer, in the meantime in the fourth generation. So still family owned, and we were founded in a very small town in Franconia, in Mittelfranken, called Vestmarksgreuth. Perhaps football enthusiasts know that they once beat Bayern Munich in the German Cup in 1994. I think that's the only reason why you would know the name of the village. But Martin Bauer started as a small peppermint farmer. And in the small village, he grew peppermint, he harvested it freshly, brought it to Nuremberg, to the next market, and sold it. And over time understood, okay, I can also dry it, I can cut it, and perhaps even pack it in tea bags. And based on that, founded a business that is now still B2B, or he went from B2B from B2C to B2B. But now we are considered the market leader in this very small niche industry. And in the meantime, we don't do only peppermint. We do more than 200 different botanical ingredients. We don't only do tea bags, but also botanical extracts, powders, mainly for the food, beverage, animal nutrition, and pharma industry. You can see the numbers here, and the numbers won't get less. I have a couple more numbers, because at the end, Martin Bauer is just refining the products. So what is really key for our whole business, as we are B2B, we manage a value chain for our customers and for all the different applications and unlimited applications of these products. So behind Martin Bauer, there are more than these 200 plant-based raw materials in more than 80 countries. Around 100,000 tons of dried ingredients is what we buy a year from just Martin Bauer Germany, 400 raw material partners in the whole network, around 1,000 plant-based raw material partners. And behind that, there are more than 300,000 people that live in these areas, that live in these more than 80 countries, that help us to procure these products. And if we would look into our supply chain perhaps 80 years ago, it would be Martin Bauer to say, okay, I need some rose hips. He goes to his neighbors and say, I need 10 kilograms of rose hips. Please, can you harvest? This is the price. And there were many people willing to go out to the forests and woods and get the rose hips out of there, sell it, and with that generate income. But as you can imagine, rosehip cultivation and collection in Germany is not that present anymore. And also in Eastern Europe, which has been the most important source for 30, 40, 50 years for us, less and less people are willing really to do that job. So the supply chain is getting more and more distanced, more and more going into countries where you still have the people interested to work in these industries. So instead of having a local supply chain, Vestmarksgreuth, now we talk about this global supply chain where we need to convince people that it is the right thing to harvest rosehips for us, with strict labor requirements, strict residue levels, with all the legislation that is there, with all the code of conducts that we receive from the global brands, and need to maintain a supply chain with all these changing things, not only climate, but also just in terms of availability of work labor. If we look into our most important product, chamomile, for example, everyone probably already drank a cup of chamomile tea, and it is around 5% of our total supply, the chamomile. But because a consumer has expectations that every time you buy your favorite chamomile tea from your favorite brand, it tastes the same, it looks the same, and hopefully also costs the same. But as chamomile is only harvested 8 weeks in a year, and you want to be supplied 24/7 or 365 days, this means that we need to have chamomile suppliers in all the countries that have overlapping harvest time. So all year round, we get continuous supply of chamomile. And even if in Germany or in Poland there is poor weather and we don't have a harvest, we can still supply you, which means we have 1 year of security stock available to also, if there's a bad season, to cover for that. So this is the whole dynamics in our industry that I think in automotive or other industries where you talk about just in time sounds completely stupid. And I think every controller has its issues with that. But that's at the end the industry in that we live. And in these supply chains, we need to make sure that everything is fine, that we have proper human rights conditions implemented, that the supply code of conducts are there, and we always motivate people to work with us and to collaborate and to grow the products for us. So to ensure that, you can imagine there are a couple of things needed in our procurement. We have a big team of supply chain managers that do the classical economic stuff, contracts, right prices, right qualities, but especially a big team of experts that is traveling into the countries of origins and supporting farmers, which is our supply chain. So we don't work with traders or big companies. The average farmer would be a business owner that perhaps does grain or maize for other products, for other customers. And as a niche also has 10 or 100 hectares where they grow our products. And so perhaps the level of knowledge, the whole interest in all the developments in this industry, and especially in the code of conduct of the end consumers or customers, is not that given. So this is why we have a big team, dedicated team in the procurement that supports and helps these farmers to comply with all the regulation, to help them to achieve certain levels of certification, to solve agricultural issues, diseases, to improve yields, to also build supply chain that are meant and feasible for the requirements of everyone. So you can see it especially at the bottom, around 200 supplier visits a year, more than 2,000 international travel days of our team, more than 200 audits a year. This is a lot just to secure in our small business that we are working properly and good in a sense that we can really produce the products regarding the requirements that there are. And it's not getting easier, because even though we have a very good risk-based supplier management system, we have all these questionnaires, we have the on-site audits, we do this annual verification. If we just look at the data, and my team does, and with that perhaps also a quick introduction, Helmut already said, Project Manager Global Sustainable Supply Chain Services. It's long. At the end, the only thing that we do is that we support our procurement and our suppliers to implement the standards that the industry and Martin Bauer set together. And these standards are based on quality, on sustainability. We have climate goals, SBTI goals that need to be implemented. And our team is there to be a specialist for our procurement team and for the suppliers to go there. But if we just look at the macro level data against what we need to fight, we see that around 70% of our raw materials come from countries where on a macro level risk analysis that I think every one of us loves and works on a daily basis shows that we have either high to extreme human rights risks or, with the timeline of 2050, high to extreme climate risks, which is in the agricultural sector, primary sector, most vulnerable people, usually not in the middle of the city and urban areas, but in the distinct areas that have the least access to services, the least exposure, or the least support from governments, usually, which is leading to a generally very high risk level. And of course, the audits help, and the audits help us to implement a general grid of security that at least the big chunks of issues can be solved, at least the processes and the management systems that we establish, they help us to ensure a certain level. But can we really ensure that the 30,000 rosehip collectors that we have in Lesotho do not get accompanied by their children that eventually also help and put some rosehips into the bags? These are the big questions that we then have. And this is also why we talk so much about, or why I want to spend the time now to talk about collaboration. We know we are perhaps the market leader, but if we cannot convince our clients to pay a premium to get certification into the supply chain, to collaborate with us with special projects to solve these topics that we can't solve through management systems, then the pressure on us is that we work with supply chains that are either not according or work according to international laws, or we cannot achieve our goals, or in the worst case, and this is happening quite a lot, we lose entire supply chains because people are not interested to work in this business anymore. They're not interested in the products. They migrate perhaps to urban areas or other countries to generate household income. And at the end, we don't have people left anymore that want to grow our products, which would be at the end the basis of our success. So this is why I'm pretty happy that I'm in this room and not in the sustainability management room, because a couple of years ago, I would say this is a hardcore sustainability topic to talk about human rights and about climate. At the end, for us, being in the agricultural industry, I mean, if the soils don't bring the yields, we can't buy products, we can sell products, and at the end, I wouldn't have a job anymore. So that's perhaps the basis. So what do we do about it? Of course, the first step, and I think there are way better qualified people in this room to talk about what kind of tools we can create. And we do create a lot of tools to help us understand the macro level risks out there, to analyze the qualitative data that we generate through audit reports or through on-ground analysis or carbon footprinting, for example. But at the end, we need to know what are the major human rights issues that we have in each supply chain, what will be the climate scenarios, or what does the climate scenario say for 2030 and 2050. So will the chamomile still grow there in 2050, or is the temperature increase and the extreme temperatures or rain patterns will be overlapping with growing cycles and the whole product won't be there anymore? So these are all questions that we need to answer to really have a long-term supplier planning or supply planning. And having the tools helps us, of course, to make decisions and to have all these corporate processes in place. But I think the more important part is, as our suppliers are farmers mainly, they won't do it by themselves. They don't have access to climate scenarios and analyze that for their geo-coordinates. So we need to create platforms to share that and to create common learning. And Helmut said also yesterday the fantastic word of co-creation, like sitting together and really jointly understanding issues and looking for joint solutions, how that can work. This will be, for example, in 2 weeks, the title also of our, at the end, supplier days this year, where we have the co-creation days together with 40 suppliers in Germany from 25 countries, where we will really spend 3 days just to talk about what will be the future requirements for our industry, what are the current risks and opportunities that we have, and how do we find platforms, forms of collaboration to jointly tackle these issues. So what do the farmers need from us or our suppliers? But also, we invited also our most important customers, so also the other direction. What are the expectations from the customer? And what would be the requirements from the suppliers also to the downstream value chain? So really using, at the end, such platforms and going through all the processes it takes to get all the people there, get the budget, get the freedom to bring together suppliers that could also talk about topics that you don't want them to talk about, is the basis for us to create this level of awareness and not just send out some slides and say, here it is, but really to find interactive forms of really joint learning. And based on that, we need to forge alliances. So we need customers to pay also for everything that happens at the upstream value chain. We need to jointly find solutions. We need to partner with development organizations, international NGOs to get that stuff done. But, and this is a new cooperation model, we also need suppliers to jointly work on topics. So if we have the same topics for the chamomile cultivation in 11 countries, why not working with these 20 suppliers that we might have there and a university to perhaps find a scientific evidence or make some scientific trials to help everyone to learn. And so to also think in different collaboration models, not just squeezing out some money of customer funds, but also going the other direction and say, hey guys, from the supply chain, what do you think? Like, what is your interest? Where can we help you to facilitate solving issues that you might face in your daily life. And of course, then motivate others to join, being a leader in the sector, not only talking about it directly with our suppliers and customers, but hopefully in future also talking about it with competitors. We're working on it. But really to say there are some pre-competitive issues that we will all face in this industry. And if we can somehow find models that work and where we can collaborate and join our forces, it should be easier than just doing it by ourselves. I won't go too much into these details, but this is especially my slide that I need for internally. Because of course we're creating supply chain transparency towards our customers, we're opening our processes, we're creating transparency for our suppliers. But there's a lot of positive things about it. There's like the empirical evidence suggests that if you increase or if you decrease the information asymmetry that you usually have between the decision makers of your customers and the knowledge you have or that the suppliers have, it will lead, in average, to a higher investment into sustainable practices. So if you open up on the risks that you have in your supply chain, it is more likely that they will also be willing to support you. Of course, especially being a family-owned business that does that for 90 years, not everyone is really excited about that. But bringing that on the table and admitting that there is a certain area where opening up information and really transparently talking about the topics that nowadays with AI anyone could find out is very, very much needed to create platforms and forms of collaboration that we all need to solve the issues we have. I brought 2 examples. I think I'm quite good in the time as well. That show us that there are models that can work fantastically. In 2019, at that time, I freshly bought a drone to make nice pictures of, in our supply chain. And I was at a supplier in Georgia. They do 20 different products from us. They have 800 collectors that really go out into the woods and collect from nettle leaves, blackberry leaves, rose hips, all these products we really need with multiple organic, fair, wild, rainforest certification. A fantastic company. And at that time we said, okay, so we have this new thing coming up called Go Zero, where we plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At that time we didn't know how to calculate it. We said, okay, let's just look at your bill. So we are transparent anyways. What do you usually have as invoice numbers for natural gas, electricity? And when we understood quite easily that shifting from natural gas as the main energy source for the drying of our herbs and replacing that with a waste of hazelnut production that you have anyways in Georgia, so the hazelnut shells, does not cost any cent more, but it gives you a certain diversification in the energy sources and especially drastically reduces the energy emissions. So we did that and built a huge storage and bought all these waste materials. And then 2020 came and the natural gas prices in Georgia skyrocketed, doubled in price. And this was a good example to show our management that climate protection can work. But what our raw material partner said, okay, so this is the first step. What's now the big vision? And now, 4 years later after my visit, I didn't come back till then. Just from economic interest, he completely reduced his dependency on natural gas from 100% to 10%. So to just have it in the worst case scenario, or if the hazelnut shell price goes too high, they built more than 800 kilowatt peak of photovoltaic to replace 100% of their electricity by PV. They even installed natural drying tunnels to detechnalize the drying processes and to make more use of natural sun heating, for example, and heat generation instead of just burning fuels. And especially what we achieved is that we involved customers in all these projects. So there were not only public funds, but also customers paid for the compost unit that we created to also make use of the waste material and create high quality fertilizers for their own fields. Now we're currently testing an electric fleet with the BYD T5. That is fantastic for in-country logistics and already now profitable. And as a best case and pilot project, also very attractive for our customer to pay for it. So through this whole process, we created a best practice that we can share to motivate others in our industry, especially to present it on our co-creation days, for example. But we also achieved that customers understood what are the current challenges and situations, and that sometimes just going a pathway, perhaps to motivate them also financially, can really lead to this transformation that we all talk about since years. And in this case, to a decarbonization of 85% footprint reduction, which is fantastic for us, which still means we still have topics to do and there's still some emissions that we need to tackle. But we created a best practice to motivate others. And especially in climate, everyone has its footprint, but the money is not there for the reduction, especially if you go on in the scope 3 emissions. So having such things in place is for us just super important. From a very nice and interesting topic like climate, going to the alert system of human rights problems. But also there, we understand that sometimes we need to play things transparently to foster collaboration. And in India, we have a fantastic example that from a non-conformity in an audit, where we identified hints for exploitative child labors, to hiring or to addressing that topic openly with our top clients, because at that time there was no certification implemented and a very high price pressure in the industry. We said, hey guys, we can implement our MABA standard, which is basically a high quality sustainability certification, also accepted by Rainforest Alliance, for example. I say, okay, let's implement that. But this means instead of just buying from traders that buy from random farmers, we will build an entire value chain, from training the farmers by ourselves, from creating warehouses locally where our supplier will buy it from them. So to implement all the training, all the documentation for the farmers, and to create a completely new value chain and going aside this black box of market that we currently have. And they were interested and said, okay, let's do that. We'll agree in a multi-year initiative and pay the premium. Let's do that. We started with a study with an international NGO to understand the human rights violations or general human rights situation in the country better. We also connected that to agronomic research, because just talking about agronomic topics brings more of a buy-in for the farmers to join your initiative. And we're still struggling to find enough farmers to work with us, because of course it's more demand for a little bit of a premium. You have so much more regulations, so much more documentation. Someone needs to pay for that. So especially with the agronomic training, they have way more benefits if they join the program. And at the end, this led to, from the first year, 10 tons of sustainably certified psyllium, to now in this year, probably 500 tons. And all of that can be sold at a premium price to our customer. So our business is happy because we significantly reduced a human rights risk in the supply chain. We have a higher margin and a higher turnover with a customer with growing interest from others. And at the end, of course, one example, and there are many, many more things that doesn't work like that. But again, creating best practices and motivating others to perhaps go this pathway and see the benefits. And I just talked about the risk side in terms of human rights, but of course also product risk, availability risk. We can address agronomic challenges, we can increase yields and therefore stabilize the supply chains. We can also stabilize prices with that through multi-annual agreements. So many, many more benefits. But perhaps not always seeing that under the core and the big name of sustainability, but really as integrated risk management in our supply chain should help us hopefully to not only have a couple best practices to share, but in a couple years, hopefully many, many more. And with that, I wrap it up. At the end, for us, risk management perhaps is still data-driven, is very much data-driven, but at the end it is especially to take along these vulnerable groups in our supply chain that don't have access to the data, that are not part of the meeting room, but to somehow find models of engaging with them on ground and really motivating also other members in the value chain to jump on this train. Thank you.